Hello everyone and welcome back. We've got another news video here to discuss. We've got a couple of signings to talk about. We got a couple of injury updates to talk about. We got an update on the waiver wire, and also grading every team's trade deadline and telling you how I feel they did. So I'll get to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here at the Internet Talker channel. Before we get into this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I'm really to love you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below, and don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below so I was discussing today's video. Now, we got a couple of signings to kick things off here today. Only 4 signings, not as much as we had in our last video, but still we do have a couple of decent signings that I want to talk about here today. First, undrafted right-shot defenseman Drew Bavaro has signed a 1-year ELC with the Boston Bruins with the AAV of $868,000 to be with the Boston Bruins organization, and the deal will start at the beginning of next year. So that's a pretty good deal in my opinion for the Boston Bruins. They're getting another undrafted player out of college. He's been playing pretty well over in the NCAA so far the past couple of years. Last year had 6 goals and 19 points in 37 games as a defenseman, which is pretty good. This year has 10 goals and 20 points in only 35 games as a defenseman over in the NCAA. So he's putting up some pretty good numbers. I know he's an undrafted prospect, but it looks like he could eventually be a solid, like maybe 6th defenseman on that Boston Bruins team. So that's a pretty good ELC signing, and hopefully he pans out for the Boston Bruins. So it's a pretty good deal in my opinion there for Boston. We then saw Toronto Maple Leafs make a much anticipated extension for one of the guys who have actually been quite good this year, and that is winger Bobby McMann. McMann has been a really good player for the Toronto Maple Leafs this year. Has been a really good bottom 6 forward ever since being called up in the minors. He's gotten a 2-year extension with the AAV of $1.35 million. And I think this is a pretty good deal for the Leafs. I mean, last year McMann was nearly a point per game at the AHL level, putting up 29 points, including 21 goals in 30 games. He also got into 10 NHL games, putting up an assist. He did quite well. So he started in the AHL this year, put up 2 goals and an assist, 3 points in 6 games. Was up and down. He sometimes was a healthy stretch at NHL level too, but he's gotten into 40 NHL games so far this year and already has 10 goals and 18 points, including his first career NHL hat trick. So I mean, McMann has been fantastic. I have no problem with the signing. It's a very variable contract if it wasn't to work out, but I think McMann has already established himself as a solid bottom 6 forward in that Leafs organization. I think it was UFA too, so signing to an extension before the free agency came was a fantastic move by the Leafs, and they were able to keep around a really solid young bottom 6 forward around for the next little while. So that's a fantastic pickup, in my opinion, for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So getting McMann signed is a pretty good signing, and I really do think he could work really well with the Leafs. Then we also saw another contract extension, this one with the St. Louis Blues. This is a 2020 5th round pick, right shot defenseman Matt Kessel. He signed a 2-year contract extension with the AAV of $800,000 that will begin at the start of next year. Now that's a pretty good deal in my opinion for Matthew Kessel. He got into 2 games of NHL action last year, put up no points, looked alright. Also got into 71 AHL games, putting up 33 points. He looked like he could eventually be a solid 3rd pair defenseman. He started the season off, I think, this year at the NHL level, put up 3 assists and 24 points. So far, 7 assists in 34 AHL games, so not a bad point total. Definitely not where you want to see him, but he definitely looked out really well when he was up with the team. He was filling in on the top 4 at some points when Justin Falk was injured. I mean, he looks like he could eventually be a solid 3rd pair, maybe even a 2nd pair defenseman. So signing for the next couple of seasons at $800,000 is pretty good, and I think Kessel will be a really good addition there for the St. Louis Blues. So that's a pretty good signing in my opinion for the Blues. And then recently, just earlier today, we saw a new signing, and that was the Calgary Flames giving an ELC to one of the players they acquired in the Elias Lindholm trade. They gave Hunter Brzustewicz, who's the right shot defenseman, which was the prized prospect they got in the Elias Lindholm deal, a 3-year ELC with the AAV of $950,000 that begin at the beginning of next year. Now, I don't expect Brzustewicz to play next year for the Calgary Flames. I mean, he's a really good defenseman, don't get me wrong, but I just think he'll probably spend another year over in the OHL, and then maybe we'll have a shot at the NHL level. I mean, last year he put up 6 goals and 57 points in 68 OHL games. This year has 12 goals and 85 points in 62 OHL games. He's been fantastic this year. One of the best offensive defensemen over in juniors. He's been absolutely great, and I think eventually he should be a solid 4th, 5th defenseman on that Calgary Flames blue line. He still, like I said, needs some more time to develop, but signing to his ELC is fantastic. And I think this is going to be a fantastic signing for the Calgary Flames, and I think this is a really great move by the Flames to sign him to his ELC. So pretty good move there for Calgary. Those are your 4 signings that we've had over the past little while. Bavaro, who's playing over in college right now, signs a 1-year ELC with the Boston Bruins. They'll kick in next year. Bobby McMann signs a 2-year extension with Toronto. Matt Kessel signs a 2-year extension in St. Louis. And Hunter Brzustewicz signs a 3-year ELC with with the Calgary Flames and should be able to at least challenge for a roster spot at next year's training camp. So lots of interesting stuff there. Going over to a quick look here at the waiver wire, not too much to discuss here today. As we said, after trade deadline, you don't usually see too many players on waivers. So the one player who was on waivers on Tuesday, like we talked about, John Gruden, we expect him to clear. Usually you don't see players after trade deadline be claimed because they can't play the rest of the regular season or in the playoffs for the team who claims them. So you don't usually see that happen, and we didn't see it here. Gruden did wind up clearing waivers, so not too surprised there. Like I said in my previous video, I thought he would have probably cleared still, even if it was before trade deadline. He's a decent forward, but he's more of an AHL forward at this point in time. I don't really see him as much of an upgrade on a lot of teams' forward groups, so not too surprised that he didn't wind up getting claimed, and he's going to be back in the AHL. And if they run into some injuries, I expect him to be another call-up option. So interesting stuff there for Pittsburgh. But that was the only waiver update from the past couple of days. Next, going over to a quick injury update here from the past couple of days. Dante Fraborough's upper body injury has been updated. He's going to be out 3 weeks. That's a horrible blow for the Predators. Andrew Kuzmenko's upper body injury is out day to day. Jacob Markstrom's lower body injury is up day to day. Smith and Hoffman in San Jose are both injured. Smith has a lower body injury. Hoffman an upper body injury, both out day to day. Jonas Siegenthaler has a head injury. He's going to be out for a known period of time. Jaden Sorcher's undisclosed injury, out for a known period of time. Evan Rodriguez in Florida and Barrett Hayden in Arizona both have lower body injuries that are keeping out day to day. But we also saw guys like Jake Gensel in Carolina, as he has now made his debut. Drew O'Connor in Pittsburgh, Travis Dermott in Arizona, Andreas Anthony in Chicago, Johansson in Minnesota, and Greenway in Buffalo all got back into game action as they were cleared to play. So really good stuff there. Then we saw Jonathan Drouin have a lower body injury and is out day to day, as is Alexei Protas due to a lower body injury too, out day to day. Eric Sinek has an undisclosed injury, out day to day. John Marino's upper body injury, out day to day. Igor Chinnikov has an upper body injury and is out day to day. Sean Corelli has a lower body injury, out week to week. Ryan Johansson has a hip injury, out for a known period of time. But we also saw guys like Tom Wilson, Nick Dowd, Martin Ferravari in Washington all be cleared to play and get back into game action. That's really good news there. Then we also saw Colin White be cleared to play by Montreal. Reece Johnson has a concussion and is going to be out for an unknown period of time. And Sam Bennett has an undisclosed injury and he's going to be out for a day-to-day period of time. So some really bad injury updates there too. So a lot of really good injury updates, seeing guys like Tom Wilson in Washington, Gensel making his debut in Carolina, Anthony Siu in Chicago, Johansson in Minnesota all go back into game action. But really bad news to see guys like Evan Rodriguez go down with an injury, Jacob Markstrom and Kuzmenko in Calgary, Duran in Colorado, Chinnikov in Columbus. Really bad to see all these guys go down with injuries, and hopefully they're able to get back in the not too distant future. And lastly, going over to a trade rumor portion of the video. Now, like we said on Tuesday, all the videos that we talked about this week, the ones that happened on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday this week, are all going to be related at some point to the trade deadline. So in this video, I'm going to be grading all the teams' trade deadlines. I mean, they all had really good trade deadlines. We talked about my 6 winners and losers of the deadline in my last video. So in this one, I'm just going to be grading each and every team's trade deadlines and how I think they did. We're going to start with the Anaheim Ducks. In season, they made a handful of moves. They acquired Karagoche for Jamie Drysdale in the 2025 second. They got a 3rd round pick for Ilya Bushkin. They got a 1st and a conditional 5th from the Oilers for Henrik and Carrick. They made a nice swap of forwards with Perot and Mishak. They acquired Ben Meyers. They had a pretty good deadline in my opinion, so I'm going to give them a B rating. And not too high of a rating for sure, but I think the Ducks had a pretty solid trade deadline. Could they have done more? I definitely think so. Could they have capitalized on some of like Vetrano's value that he's had this year? I think they could have definitely done that. I could have seen them maybe make 1 or 2 more moves, maybe try and improve this team more for the future. But still, I really do like what the Ducks have done, and I'm going to give them a B rating. Going over to the Calgary Flames, who are actually one of my winners from the winner and loser video. They had a really good moves in season. I mean, they moved Zadorov for a couple of picks. They moved Lindholm for a couple of prospects, Kuzmenko and a couple of draft picks. They moved Tanev for a couple of draft picks and prospect Rushnikov. They got Miromanov and a couple of picks for moving Noah Hannafin. They also made a prospect swap with Dallas, and then they also got a Kotyuk from San Jose. I mean, I really like what they did. I'm going to give them an A-. Not an overly great rating. I think they could have been doing some more things. That Markstrom situation was definitely weird, and I do wonder if it's another thing we have to watch out for in the offseason. But all in all, I think the Calgary Flames are quite good this offseason. Going over to the Edmonton Oilers, I mean, for them, they didn't do overly much. They did 2 trades in season, add Stetcher, Henrik, and Carrick, and gave up a 4th round pick, a conditional 5th, a 1st, and a conditional 4th. It's not overly bad for the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, they're going for it right now, so giving up those picks not going to be a huge piece for them. They had a pretty decent trade deadline, so I'm going to give them a B-. Pretty good, solid deadline. Probably could have added some more things. Definitely, I was expecting them to do a little bit more, but still interesting stuff there. And I do think they had a pretty good deadline. LA Kings, they didn't make 1 single trade in season, so I'm going to give them a straight F. I thought they would have done at least a little bit, especially in a competitive Western Conference, and they're going to run it with with what they have right now. So I'm not overly confident with that. I'm going to give them a rating of an F. Sounds like Sharks didn't do overly bad. I mean, they made a lot of moves in season. They added Kalen Addison a while ago, added Jack Stanichka. They moved Duclair for a third and Thompson, which I think was pretty good. They also added Klim Kostin, moved Kotyuk, added Devin Cooley, made the goalie swap with New Jersey for Vanacek, and then moved Thomas Hertl. I mean, not all those moves were really good. I mean, having to retain on Hertl is not overly great, and they could have easily moved a couple other guys. I was expecting Granlund to possibly be moved, Barabanov, some of the other pending UFAs. So they're not perfect, but they did have a pretty good trade deadline, so I'm going to give them a B rating. That's a pretty good rating in my opinion for the San Jose Sharks. Going over to the Seattle Kraken, they didn't have a very active in-season moves. They traded Wenberg for 2 picks, and they added Thomas Tatar back in December. So they didn't have a very productive trade deadline, but I do like what they did. I mean, they signed Eberle, they got Wenberg dealt. I don't think Wenberg's coming back, so with that in mind, I'm going to give them a B-. They didn't have a half-bad trade deadline. They didn't have a great trade deadline, but they didn't have a really bad one either. So I really do like what the Kraken did this trade deadline. Going over to the Vancouver Canucks, I mean, they made a lot of moves in season, moving Anthony Beauvillier to acquire Nikita Zadorov, made a couple of depth moves, then added Lindholm from Calgary. I mean, they had a really good trade deadline. I'm going to give them also an A-. I think adding Lindholm and Zadorov were fantastic moves for them. Could they have made some more moves? Yes, I definitely think it's possible, but I really do like what they've done. So A- in my opinion for the Vancouver Canucks. Meanwhile, for Vegas, they made 3 trades. All of them go for it moves. They added Noah Hanifin for Miromanov and a couple of picks, and Mantha for a couple of picks, and then also added Hertl and a couple of thirds for 2 first-round quality pieces. But this is Vegas going for it again. I completely love what they did. They had a fantastic deadline. I'm giving them an A+. Vegas did a fantastic job this offseason. So those teams all did quite well. Going over to the Arizona Coyotes, not an overly great deadline in my opinion. I mean, they made 3 moves, acquiring a 5th, a 6th, and a 4th in exchange for moving Dumba, Zucker, and Stecher, which I think is pretty bad value for those guys. I think they could have easily gotten a lot more for them, so I'm going to give them a D-. Not the worst of trade deadlines, as they did get a couple of picks, but still way away from a really great trade deadline for the Coyotes. So definitely not something I like to see. Going over to the Chicago Blackhawks, they did not have a very productive trade deadline, as they only made a couple of small moves, including just moving Beauvillier for a 5th, acquiring Beauvillier for a 5th, and then also acquiring Rem Pitlick from Pittsburgh. I mean, they didn't really have huge things to do. They assigned some of their other prospects, which was good, but didn't have a whole bunch of things they needed to do. So I'm giving them a C+. They had an average trade deadline, and not something to be ashamed of, but not also something to be proud of either. Next, going over to the Avalanche, now they had a very productive and very entertaining deadline period. I mean, if you go back far enough, they moved Tomas Tatar, they also moved Curtis McDermott, but they went out, they got Walker, they moved Byram from Middlestat, they added Duhaime, they added Trenin, they moved Ben Mayers. I mean, they had a pretty productive trade deadline. I think this is a better team than there was a couple of weeks ago, so I'm going to give the Avalanche an A+. I mean, they had a fantastic trade deadline, so I really do like what the Avalanche brought. Going over to the Dallas Stars, they made 2 small moves. I mean, they had a prospect swap with Calgary, then they also added Chris Tanev. That was a big move. That was a huge move. It was the move they needed to make to improve their blue line, as they have a pretty solid and complete forward group. So I really do like what the Stars did, adding Tanev, so I'm going to give them a B. Not a great deadline, and I think they could have easily added some more pieces, but they definitely made a really good move in adding Tanev, and I think it really does help them. Then we saw Minnesota Wild sell off pieces. First, it was earlier in the season as they moved off Kalen Addison, and then recently they moved off their 4th line in Duhaime, Dewar, and Maroon. So they definitely made a lot of moves. Does it make them better right now? No. They were able to get a couple of picks for some players who are going to be pending UFAs. So honestly, I do like what the Wild brought. I'm going to give them a B-. I think they had a fantastic offseason. Not the greatest of off seasons, and they're still sort of in no man's land right now, but I do think with what they need to do, I really do think they had a pretty good trade deadline. Going over to Nashville, they didn't make a whole bunch of moves. They moved Yakov Trenin, added Beauvillier, Zucker, Allison to their group. Not a bad trade deadline, but a decent one, so I'm going to give them a B. Given where they're on the standings, I think that's probably the best rating they could get right now. Going over to the St. Louis Blues, once again, just like Coyotes, just like the Kings, didn't really do much in season. They only made 2 moves, moving Bortuzzo to the Islanders back in December, and moving Malcolm Subban on deadline day. I mean, not huge moves. I'm going to give them a D, a little bit better than the Arizona Coyotes, but still, I was expecting them to make some moves, sell off some pieces. They didn't. That's a little bit disappointing in my opinion. And then we just saw the Winnipeg Jets. They had a fantastic trade deadline. They added a couple of pieces, including Monahan, Toffoli, Miller, 3 really good trades in my opinion. So I'm going to give them an A+. They were fantastic this trade deadline. They going for it, and I really do like what the Jets have done. So really good moves there for the Jets. Next, going over to the Boston Bruins. I mean, the Bruins, they didn't really do much. They added Peak and Maroon. That's the extent of their trade deadline. So I'm going to give them a C-. Not the greatest of deadlines, pretty average. I mean, the Peak and Maroon additions are pretty good, but they're not overly great either. So some pretty good moves there for the Bruins. I'm going to give them a C-. Sabres didn't really make a whole bunch of moves. I mean, they acquired Eric Robinson a little while ago. They also swapped Byron for Milsa, which seems to be working out fantastically for them. They also moved Kyle Pozo, Eric Johansson for a couple of low-end picks. Got a 7th round pick for Devin Cooley, which I think is pretty good. So all in all, I think the Sabres had a pretty decent deadline. I'm giving them a B-. Not too bad of a deadline. Could have been better, but I think I really do like what they brought. Going over to Detroit Red Wings, they made one trade. That's to subtract Klim Kostin off that roster. They're in a playoff spot. They subtract off the roster. That's completely a bad trade deadline, in my opinion. I'm giving them a D-. Not a great trade deadline. I thought they would have gone for it a little bit more, but they wound up selling off piece. So not great stuff there for the Red Wings. For Florida, they made a couple of really good adds, adding some goalie depth in Hellberg, also adding guys like Kyle Pozo and Vladimir Tarasenko in the forward group. They had a pretty decent trade deadline. I'm giving them a B. I think they had a pretty good deadline, and I think this is going to help this team improve in the standings. Then we also saw Montreal Canadiens make a couple of moves. Earlier in the year, we saw them move Monahan. Then also saw them make a prospect swap with Anaheim. They also moved Jake Allen for a decent pick. So all in all, I think the Canadiens had a pretty decent deadline. Could they have moved Savard? Could they move Jordan Harris? Yes, I think it's possible. It's not a great deadline, but I am going to give them a B+. I think they had a pretty decent one. So I really do like what the Canadiens did, and I think these moves do help them for the future. The Senators made one move, moving Tarasenko for a 3rd and 4th round pick. I know Tarasenko had a lot of saying where he went, and that really hindered their return, but still, I don't think that was an overly great trade deadline for the Senators. I'm giving them a C-. Not really a fantastic deadline there for the Ottawa Senators. Going over to Tampa, not an overabundance of moves. I mean, they helped facilitate the Adam Henrique deal. They moved Zach Bogosian to Minnesota earlier in the year. They add Dumba, they add Duclair, decent additions, but not the level they've had over the past couple of years. So all in all, I'm going to give them a C. A really average deadline for the Tampa Bay Lightning, and definitely one I don't think they would like to replicate. Going over to Toronto Maple Leafs, they add a couple of decent defensemen, including Edmondson, including Leah Bushkin. They also had Connor Dewar. So they added a couple of decent pieces to this team. Not an overabundance of moves, though, and I think the C+ is worth their while for this year. Not an overly great trade deadline. Definitely didn't go for it like some of these other teams in the Eastern Conference did. So a decent trade deadline, but not a great one. Then we saw the Carolina Hurricanes make a couple of splashes by helping facilitate the Leah Bushkin deal, and also adding Gensel and Kuznetsov. Fantastic moves there for the Carolina Hurricanes. I love what they did. They were my second best team in the winners and losers. I think they had the second best trade deadline, and I'm going to give them an A rating. I think they had a fantastic deadline. On top of that, the Blue Jackets made a couple of moves. Adding Alex Nylander seems to be a really under the radar, pretty good pickup there. They also were able to add Jacob Zaboral in the 3rd for Peak. Getting rid of Peak's contract's pretty good for them. They were also able to add a 4th for Roslovic. So I think they had a pretty decent deadline. I'm going to give them a C+. Not a great deadline. I definitely think there were some things that they could have also done beyond what they did, but I do think they had a pretty decent deadline. Not a bad deadline, but not a great deadline either. So really good stuff there for the Jackets. Then for the Devils, I really like what they did. I mean, they added Curtis McDermott. They moved to Foley and Miller. They switched up the goaltending by adding Kakkonen and Allen. So I really do like what the Devils brought this trade deadline. I really do like what they added. So in my opinion, I'm going to give them a B+. That's a pretty decent rating there for the Devils, and I think they had a pretty decent trade deadline. Going over to the Islanders, they really only made one trade in season. That was adding Bertuzzo back in December. I mean, they really didn't do much this trade deadline, so I'm going to give them a D. Not a really great deadline. Definitely one I think they want to have back, and where they could have easily made some moves. They're right on the edge of a playoff spot, so I can see why they wouldn't want to make moves. But still, it's really interesting and perplexing to see they didn't make any moves. For the New York Rangers, adding Wenberg, adding Roslovic, adding Ruedel, adding some depth to that team really was a really great move there for the Rangers. Going to give them a B. Could they have gotten some more depth? I definitely think they could have used another right winger. So I'm not going to say they did a really great job in the trade deadline, but I do think they had a fantastic deadline, adding some more pieces to help this team get closer and closer to Stanley Cup contention. Going over to the Philadelphia Flyers, they made some decent moves. Not great ones, though. I mean, they were able to get a first-round pick for moving Walker and taking on Ryan Johansson's contract. They acquired Jamie Drysdale in order for moving Carter Gauthier earlier in the year. They helped facilitate the Noah Hannafin deal, added Eric Johnson, Denis Gurianov. Not fantastic moves, in my opinion. Decent moves, though, so I'm going to give them a C+. Not a great deadline for the Flyers. They were able to get a first-round pick, which I really think swung their direction in a more positive favor, but still not a great deadline there for the Flyers. For the Penguins, they moved Alex Nylander, got Emil Bemstrom. It's a pretty decent decent pick there for the Penguins. They then also moved Ruedel, Gensel, and Hellberg. Those are all pending UFAs, so not surprised that they wound up moving those guys. But I am a little bit surprised that some of these guys stayed, like Alex Nedeljkovic. I thought he would have been moved. Riley Smith, Marcus Pettersson. There were a couple of guys who were potentially being looked at to be moved. So I'm a little bit surprised that the Penguins didn't do more. So I'm going to give them a C+. A decent deadline, and I think they got a decent return in my opinion for Jake Gensel, but it was not a fantastic return, and they didn't do a whole bunch. So I'm going to give them a C+. For the Capitals, they made 3 moves: moving Kuznetsov, moving Edmondson, and moving Anthony Mantza. I mean, they were pretty good moves in my opinion for the Washington Capitals. They got picks for all of those guys, no prospects or anything, just picks. I think that's perfect there for the Washington Capitals. So I'm going to give them a B-. Not a great offseason. I think they could have made a couple more moves, moving like a guy like Nick Dowd, moving a guy like TJ Oshie. They are injured, so I can see why they might not want to move them, but I could have seen them more. But instead, I think they had a pretty decent trade deadline. So just to recap here, Carolina gets an A rating, Columbus a C+, Jersey a B+, NYI a D, NYR a B, Philly and Pittsburgh both get C+, Washington gets a B-, Boston gets a C-, Buffalo gets a B-, Detroit gets a D-, Florida gets a B, Montreal gets a B+, Ottawa gets a C-, Tampa gets a C, Toronto gets a C+, Arizona gets a D-, Chicago gets a C+, Colorado gets an A+, Dallas gets a B, Minnesota gets a B-, Nashville gets a B, St. Louis gets a D, Winnipeg gets an A+, Anaheim gets a B, Calgary gets an A-, Edmonton gets a B-, LA gets an F, San Jose gets a B, Seattle gets a B-, Vancouver gets an A-, and Vegas gets an A+. And those are my ratings for the teams coming out of the trade deadline and how I think they did over the trade deadline period. So definitely, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. What would you rate all these teams with the ratings, how they did the trade deadline? What do you think your favorite team did at the trade deadline? Do you think they got an A, B, C, D, or an F? So I definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. And that's all I'm going to talk about for today. From today this video, if you're like to subscribe down below. Thank you for all your support on every video of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below, and don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below so I'll discuss in today's video. I also have a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So if you check that out, I'll leave a link down in the description below, and I can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.